Hello, everyone. Good evening. I am Aishan Hutchinson, the director of the creative writing program here at Cornell. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this, the second event in the spring 2021 Barbara and David Zalaznick reading series, Together. For tonight's reading, there will be 4 more in the series. Please do check out our website for more details and sign up to be added to our email list. This series is made possible thanks to the generosity of our donors, Barbara and David Zalaznick, to whom we extend our bountiful thanks. Tonight's event is a special and timely conversation between Rita P. Davis, the Chief Counsel to Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, and my colleague, Lyrae Van Clief-Stefanon. Professor Van Clief-Stefanon will introduce Chief Counsel Davis, who will give her opening remarks about her journey from English major into law and activism, after which Professor Van Clief-Stefanon will moderate a conversation with Chief Counsel Davis about this journey. You can also participate in the conversation by submitting questions in the chat throughout the event. We encourage you to do so. Keep them coming. A reminder that this event is being recorded. The recording will be available to view at the same link afterwards. Now over to you, Lyrae.
Thanks, Aishan. Rita Poindexter Davis is originally from Bedford County, Virginia. After graduating from Washington and Lee University, she spent 3.5 years as a police officer with the Lynchburg City Police Department. While there, she worked in patrol, street crimes, DARE, vice investigations, and in several undercover assignments. After graduating from the University of Richmond School of Law, Ms. Davis clerked for the Honorable Richard S. Arnold on the United States Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit in Little Rock, Arkansas. Following her clerkship, Ms. Davis joined the Richmond office of Hunton & Williams LLP, now known as Hunton Andrews Kurth, as a complex commercial litigator, where she worked for 15 years before joining the Office of the Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Virginia. She was the first Black woman section chief for trials in the Civil Litigation Division. Ms. Davis was appointed as counsel to the Honorable Ralph S. Northam in January of 2018. She is the first Black woman to have served as counsel to a Virginia governor. I first met Rita at a recruitment weekend at Washington and Lee University when we were both 17 years old. Even at that young age, Rita was bold and ambitious, a young woman with a clear vision for what she wanted to achieve and a concrete plan for how to get there. That year, Washington and Lee was just graduating its first class of women. I will never forget walking with Rita down W&L's colonnade onto the adjoining campus of the then still all-male Virginia Military Institute. We were Black girls from small towns, connected by a strongly held belief in our abilities to affect change in the world. We wrote letters to each other that summer as we finished our senior years in high school, and we both chose to matriculate at Washington and Lee in the fall, eventually both also choosing the English major. It has been a joy and a privilege having a front row seat to her life for all of these years and to celebrate with her all of her accomplishments. As part of our ongoing series asking what to do with a major in literature in English, please welcome my dear friend, Rita Davis.
Thank you, Lyrae. Thank you so much. And thank you to Cornell University, Department of Literatures and English. Thank you to the Zalaznicks for their generous endowment that allowed this program to be possible. Thank you to the wonderful team at Cornell, Aishan, Chris, Aurora, Lynn, Nicholas, thank you guys for making this possible and being so very patient with me as we work towards this program. And a special thank you to Professor Van Clief-Stefanon, who I will always refer to lovingly as Ray. This is quite an honor to be a part of this reading series. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what brought me to the Office of the Governor and share with you a little bit of my story. But what I do here for the governors is pretty, lengthy. I have a team of 3 people who work with me. I came in January of 2018 with the administration, and the governor's term will end in January 2022. By law, the governor cannot succeed himself, which means he's limited to serving 1 term, and then he has to sit out and he can rerun again, but he cannot rerun for the same seat consecutively. So we will be leaving this wonderful job in a few months, and it saddens me a lot. What we do for the governor is pretty extensive. We provide legal advice to the governor, his staff, and his cabinet regarding Virginia's conflict of interest laws, regarding Freedom of Information Act requests. We help interpret state laws, rules, and regulations. We prepare, coordinate, and review the governor's executive orders and directives. We make recommendations on all proposed legislation that is passed out of the General Assembly, which is our legislative making body, and recommend to the governor whether or not he veto, amend, or sign each piece of that legislation. We review requests for clemency that come to the governor, that is pardon requests, writs for habeas, or extraditions. We assist with the development of executive branch policies, procedures, and training, and we review the state's response to emergencies and disaster mitigation. We review the agency rules and regulations that are submitted for the governor's approval. And so it's a big job, and it's probably the best job I've ever had in my entire life. And I would be the first to admit that it seems a little incongruous to have someone who's counsel to a governmental officer part of this very esteemed series, right? A series that has historically featured poets and international authors. I don't write books or poems or plays, or I'm not a professional writer. But then as I really started to think about it, I thought maybe it's really not that unusual. I am professionally trained as a lawyer, and one of the things that lawyers do is we consume and produce language. That is sort of like the main part of what we do for our clients. But I want to give you sort of a flavor about how I got here. Ray has mentioned that I grew up in a very small town in Virginia called Bedford. Bedford is a town of about 6,000 people, and it has consistently been a town of about 6,000 people since 1980. It's predominantly white. It's very conservative. I grew up in a household with 2 sisters, one older, one younger. Our parents were working class parents. My father was a mechanic. My mother was a seamstress. And financially, things were very tough for us. I remember being very cognizant of that, even from a very young age, and sort of the stress it caused on our family. Neither of my parents graduated from high school, and but they were very focused still on education, and they made it very clear that they expected us to also focus on education. I went to predominantly white elementary schools and high schools, and I did relatively well in school, and very early on, I developed a love for books. It was mostly escapism at first, right? I was an introvert in elementary school. I actually had a little bit of a speech impediment. So I preferred reading rather than engaging with other people. I actually received speech therapy when I was in elementary school. And the odd thing about it, it was called special reading. And I thought even then that was rather odd because there was nothing wrong with my ability to read. I consumed books. It was vocalizing certain, vowels and consonants that gave me a bit of a challenge. but reading was not a challenge for me. I would read anything. I read newspapers, magazines, books. I read the encyclopedia. Interestingly enough, I still have that same volume of the 1968 Worldwide Encyclopedia that I read many times in many volumes as a child. I actually, I'm gonna admit something I probably have never told anyone, probably not even Lyrae. But one of the things I used to do a lot when I was younger is I would sneak into my older sister's room. It's still her romance novels. And then I would put them inside the magazine so that I could read them around the house without detection, because those were things I was really interested in. During the summers, my mom would take me to the library in Bedford, which was really nothing more than a old two-story Victorian house crammed with shelves of books, but I loved it. So very early on in my life, I knew I loved books. Specifically, I loved stories. I loved language. I also knew something else very early in my life, and that was that I was going to go to law school, that I wanted to be a lawyer. And the first time I can remember actually knowing that that's what I wanted to do was in fourth grade. And I remember buying a mug in this little pharmacy in Bedford. And on the front of the mug, it had the word lawyer. And when you pick the mug up, it would play Frank Sinatra's I Did It My Way. I still have that mug. I have kept it for an inordinately long time. But it just reminds me of how long it's taken me to get somewhere that I knew that I always wanted to be. The other thing that I have is in seventh grade, I had a very good friend who gave me this brass gavel because I told everybody I was going to go to law school. And I have lugged that gavel around with me everywhere since seventh grade. And I currently have it still in my office. And when people ask me why law, I've never been able to really articulate a sensible reason. I have just known. It's like it was a part of me forever that that's what I wanted to do. And one of the things I think that Ray and I will talk about tonight is this notion of knowing, of intuition, and being at a place where you can take a risk because of that intuition and grow from it. And so probably the biggest risk, the first biggest risk I took was going to Washington Lee University. As I've mentioned, my parents didn't graduate high school. I didn't know anyone in my family who'd gone to college. So I had every intention of going to college, but I didn't really know much about what it took to get there. And I remember very distinctly in ninth grade, sitting in an academic English class, and one of my favorite teachers in the world, Miss Holdren, walked past my desk and sat down a pamphlet for Washington and Lee. I'd never heard of Washington and Lee before. And she said, I think you should consider this school. I think you will really like it. So I looked at the pamphlet. And then fortuitously, we actually had a field trip to Lexington, Virginia, maybe my sophomore or junior year. And Washington and Lee was one of the campuses along with BMI that we toured. And I absolutely just fell in love with the campus. It was just beautiful. It appeared to me to be everything an educational institution should at least look like. So I applied to Washington and Lee, early decision, my senior year in high school. I only applied to Washington and Lee, which no one does anymore, right? No one just applies to one school. Luckily, I got in, and as Ray said, we sort of met each other pursuant to going to a recruitment weekend. And it was, amazing. And I will tell you that probably 78% of my decision to go to that school was because Ray said she was going to go to that school. And so it was a wonderful experience for me to be there with Ray. And we both sort of bonded very quickly. And we both knew we wanted to be English majors. We both had a lot of love of literature and writing. And I enjoyed my time at Washington and Lee as an English major. And it seemed a sort of natural fit for me, considering, my love of books and my love of language. When I left Washington and Lee, I had every intention of going to law school, but to be quite candid with you, I didn't think my grades were going to make me a competitive applicant. So I said, I have got to do something else to make my application stand out, something that's going to make me seem different. And that was one of the reasons I pursued law enforcement after undergrad. And I went to look at the different law enforcement agencies sort of around the area where I lived, around Bedford, in Lynchburg City. It's not very far from Bedford County, actually. And to tell you the truth, one of the big reasons I actually sort of went through with applying to law school was because after having a conversation with my father and expressing my interest in doing that, he expressed his doubt that I was tough enough. In fact, he said, no, you're not going to last. It's too hot out there on those streets for you. Well, anyone who knows me pretty much understood that my application was pretty much signed and completed the moment he completed that sentence. And I went to Lynchburg City Police Department, and I was there, as Ray has told you, for 3.5 years. I did a lot of amazing assignments and met a lot of wonderful people and really enjoyed my time there. I was very fortunate to get to do a lot of spectacular things. And quite frankly, one day I looked up, I was a vice investigator, driving an undercover car, wearing, these cool clothes and doing all this dangerous stuff. And I thought, this is a lot of fun. I have to leave because I was afraid that, 5 or 10 years from now, I'd be having so much fun and I'd never get to law school. So I left Lynchburg City and went to the University of Richmond Law School, and I enjoyed it. And for me, law school was, it was like the best thing ever. I was reading about law. I was, getting to study and analyze it. And, when I compared, working patrol and, doing building searches at 2 a.m. in the morning, sitting at a carrel reading books about law seemed like a vacation to me. And so, I did that. And I met a lot of really cool people and made a lot of connections. And once I finished law school, I got the opportunity to work on the 8th Circuit with, as Ray has mentioned, Judge Arnold. And so I traveled out to Little Rock and spent a year there. And Little Rock was wonderful, but it also emphasized for me how much I loved the East Coast and how much I wanted to get back to that. So I came back to the East Coast and started working in Hunton at the time. And I ended up at Hunton again. It was a risk. My first year in law school, for those of you who know anything about law school, you go through this first semester, and then your second semester, you have something called on-campus interviews with law firms for your first summer. And I got through my first semester, and I really knew nothing about working at law firms for the first summer, but everyone in my class kept talking about this Hunton Williams, like everybody wanted to work there. So I did a little research and I said, yeah, okay, it's in Richmond. Sounds like it's a big firm. I'll do an on-campus interview. So I did the on-campus interview, and I really liked the folks who interviewed me. So I applied. I only applied to one law firm for that entire summer, which again, nobody now does it like that. And I would never advise anyone to do it like that. But I felt a connection to the people that were there, and intuitively, I felt like that was the best place for me. And luckily, it was a good decision. I spent 15 years there litigating complex commercial cases, and it was wonderful. I enjoyed going to court. I enjoyed litigation. I enjoyed discovery. I enjoyed depositions. And litigation it's sort of akin to creating, because that is what you're doing from the moment you get a client. You are building a case. You are creating a story. And at the end, you get to put on this big show called a trial about your story. And hopefully you built it in such a persuasive way that the judge and the jury will be convinced that your client should prevail. So it wasn't really that different from what I experienced in as an English major and sort of studying language and stories. There came a time, though, after 15 years, where I felt like I wasn't growing professionally at the firm anymore, and I didn't get into court very much. Sort of the nature of litigation changed. It was more motions hearings, and it was bigger cases, and the things I loved about it, I just didn't get to do as much. So I decided to look for something else, and that's when this opportunity at the Office of the Attorney General came up. I will tell you that going to the Office of the Attorney General after 15 years at Hunt it was very tough. But the job and the work there was exactly what I fell in love with about the law, which was, going to trials and doing depositions and doing discovery and building cases and traveling around. And so it was a good fit for me. But there was a lot of risk there. I had to take a huge salary cut to do that. And luckily, my family, especially my husband, was very supportive of that. But sometimes when I tell people that, I took a 6-figure salary cut to go to the Office of Attorney General because they were doing what I loved. And that was ultimately what was important to me, to go to work every day and do something I love to do. And that is more important than money, at least for me it was. So I went to the Office of the Attorney General, and I was there for about about a year before I was asked to interview for this position with the governor. And I will tell you, I did not know the governor before I interviewed with him. I did not work on his campaign. I had really no big connections to politics, to be honest with you. So the first time I sat down with an interview with him was the first time I'd actually met him. And again, intuitively, I just knew after talking to him that this was going to be a good opportunity. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the governor or on TV or know anything about him, but he's extremely genuine. He is exactly the person you see on TV. He's a great leader. And he has done so much for Virginia for lots of reasons, but I knew in that moment that that was going to be a place where I could thrive. And so I accepted the job offer, and I've been here since January of 2018, and it has been an incredible ride. I don't know if Ray will talk a little bit about all the things that the governor has done in Virginia, but if any of you familiar with Virginia and its history and what this administration is doing, will know that there are significant changes taking place in Virginia under the governor's leadership, and all of which I'm extremely proud to be a part of. And so that's just a little bit about, how I got here.
So when and how did you decide to major in English specifically? Because I didn't, like you were saying, we both knew that we were English major, but I came in as journalism and East Asian studies. What was the moment that you decided, yes, the English major was the thing that you were going to do?
I don't think I ever considered a different major. I think I came to WNL knowing that I was going to major in English because it seemed such a natural fit for me, having already sort of developed a love for books and for writing and the magic of language. Being able to get a major doing the things I already love to do seemed like a no-brainer for me. So that was an easy decision.
Do you remember what your favorite book was then?
Ooh, from college?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, I have a lot of favorite authors, and I think you probably know one of my favorites is Sula by Toni Morrison. But one of the things that I loved about WNL, I guess in any sort of liberal arts education, is that you get exposed to things that are outside of your comfort zone. And so one of the things I loved about that experience is getting to read a lot of authors that I wasn't necessarily familiar with. And so, I loved a lot of Alice Walker's work and Toni Morrison's work. And it was eye-opening to read those things and read about people who, looked like me and had the same sort of shared experiences. But I also remember this one book, and I don't know if you remember it, Ray, but I think it was called The Monk. And it was one of those books from Professor Lynch's class. And I just remember thinking and sort of talking in class about the layers of that and the portrayal of women in that book and sort of the dichotomy of the good woman versus the bad woman. And for some reason, that's sort of like stuck with me over the years.
The good woman versus the bad woman. It's
Right.
because when you mentioned Sula, there's that question where she asks, like, how did you know that you're the good one, or something like that.
Right.
Um, that was, we read that together in Professor Duval's class, if I'm not mistaken, in Severin Duval's class. And here's the odd thing that I wanted to ask you, if you remembered how this happened. How did we take to calling each other Sula and Nell?
I don't remember like the first time that we sort of came to the recognition that their relationship was sort of akin to our relationship. But I do remember thinking as we read this book that Sula and Nell, sort of their almost natural attraction to one another and sort of being maybe different sides of the same coin, but maybe not, sort of reflected kind of our friendship, this sort of almost gravity towards one another and feeling like you've known each other from the moment you met forever. And the easiness of that friendship, I thought, you know, for me, sort of epitomized kind of our friendship. And so through the years, Ray and I, we write to each other, and infrequently we refer to each other as Nell and Sula when we address one another. Do you
Yeah.
remember the first time we
I
made that?
don't. I don't. And it's such a strange thing to say. And I think a lot about the interviews that Toni Morrison has done, where she talks about how she wanted to write about friendship, like the real friendship in the fullest extent that exists between Black women and other groups. And she wanted to write about friendship as a valid experience and as an enhancing experience, but not to flatten it out into some kind of triumph over all odds or something like that. And so it's such a complex and layered portrayal of what it's like for Black women to be friends in the world. And yeah, so that's a thing that always kind of stuck out to me too, and that it's a thing that has lasted between us. There's that postcard that you sent me from London the first time that you went to London, where you're like, "Hey, Sula, I'm in London." And I just remember thinking, "Okay, wow, we're in this complex world and traveling around in this way that I'm really grateful that there are people who are writing in such a way that it's possible to represent something like that."
Yeah, I agree. And so as you know, I reread Sula just recently, and there's this particular passage of that book that when I read it, again, reminded me of our friendship and sort of this sort of almost spiritual connection that people can have to one another. That's just so beautiful. And I'd like to share a little bit of it with you. So Toni Morrison writes, "So when they met, first in those chocolate halls and next through the ropes of the swing, they felt the ease and comfort of old friends, because each had discovered years before that they were neither white nor male, and that all freedom and triumph was forbidden to them, that they had to set about creating something else to be. Their meeting was fortunate, for it let them use each other to grow on. Daughters of distant mothers and incomprehensible fathers, Sula's because he was dead, Nell's because he wasn't. They found in each other's eyes the intimacy they were looking for."
That's so beautiful and really, really interesting to me. I've been looking lately at things that people have pulled out of the archives about the sisterhood, a group of friends that included Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, June Jordan, Intisakeshanga, people like that who were meeting together on a regular basis to fight against the sense of that competition, and like kind of struggling against each other was the natural state of women engaging with each other or something like that. And so that idea of a legendary friendship is interesting to me, but also the idea of a vision of an alternative future than the one, because it says that like none of those things were supposed to be allowed to them. I've watched you over the years kind of draft an alternative future maybe than the one that would have been expected or provided for someone coming out of the tiny town that either of us came out of. Can you talk about the vision for a future maybe that you see for yourself now as you're leaving this position, and also talk a little bit about what you're reading now and what is motivating and inspiring you?
So I think, yes, I can. So I've always, and maybe this is part of the intuition, but I've always sort of seen in my mind's eye the person, not necessarily that I currently am, but the person that I wanted to be. And the first time I can really remember sort of seeing this alternative future for myself was, you know, as a little girl sitting at the kitchen table, eating, you know, bologna and pork and beans for like the fourth time that week, thinking, this is not who I am. This is not where I want to be. This is not my future. And I would, you know, imagine myself somewhere else. I would imagine that, you know, I had on something fantastic and I was sitting at a French restaurant, and my circumstances were different because I felt like inside that's who I really was. And that's what I was sort of destined to be. And so it's interesting because what you find is that a lot of people, especially people who've gone on to great positions of leadership, have this sort of alternative view of the future. And in one of the books that I'm currently reading that I absolutely love, and anybody who hasn't picked it up should pick it up, is Leadership in Turbulent Times. And I will say that one of the reasons I got this book is one of my fellow cabinet members who's reading it, read it and said, this is a great book and it reminds me a lot of you, and I'd like for you to read it. So he let me borrow his copy and I started reading it. And it is written by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and it is sort of a profile of different styles of leadership and how these presidents came to those positions. And it focuses on Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Lyndon B. Johnson. And each one of them comes to leadership from different places, and each of their leadership styles is different, but each of them led through very turbulent times. And there's a particular passage that the author writes about that, again, really struck a chord with me. And she's talking about a young Abraham Lincoln. And in it, she says, in the end, the unending strain with his father enhanced, rather than diminished, young Lincoln's ambition. Year after year, as he persevered in defiance of his father's wishes, managing his negative emotions and exercising his will to slowly master one subject after another, he developed an increasing belief in his own strengths and powers. He came to, quote, trust that he was going to be something, end quote. His cousin Sophie Hanks related, slowly creating what one leadership scholar calls a vision of an alternative future. He told a neighbor he did not, quote, intend to delve, grub, shuck corn, split rails, and the like. I'll study and get ready, and then the chance will come, end quote. So it's, I guess it's sort of this notion of believing that there is something greater than what people are telling you your future is, and holding fast to that, and being ready to accept that when it comes your way, sort of being prepared to accept that grace and that gift. And I've been very lucky to date to be in places where I could accept those blessings when they came to me. And so my biggest challenge now is figuring out what's next for me, and what I want to do, and what's going to be sort of the opportunity that continues to allow me to grow professionally. And I'm not sure what that is yet. And I think part of it might be that I'm sort of in denial that I'm not going to get to stay here forever and continue to do this. But it is something that I hope that all children, right, all young people sort of understand, that your mind's eye can create the future that you want for yourself. And then it's just up to you to prepare for it, to take the risks, to stop second guessing yourself, and to sort of banish those sort of feelings that you're unworthy or you can't accomplish something because you haven't done it before. Well, that's the exact reason to do it, right? Because it's something you haven't done before, and it offers that sort of growth opportunity. So I'm looking to see what my next growth opportunity is going to be.
It's funny, I was thinking about, as you were talking, I was thinking about, I taught my freshman writing seminar today, and it's just full of such just brilliant, wonderful students. And one of the things that I've been encouraging them to do is to stop looking for what is the right answer, or the answer that you think that I want to hear, and to just tell me what you really think, or tell me what about this passage that we're reading, or what about the things that we're talking about in class. Where is your delight? What delights you? Mm-hmm. What delights you?
Wow, what delights me? Well, I will say I'm a mother of 2 extraordinary children. So, and I think Ray and anybody who sort of known me growing up, the fact that I had kids is probably surprising. It was never something that was kind of on my radar, but one of the things that delights me is just sort of watching them develop personalities, and be curious about the world, and challenge what the world tells them, right? And develop this sort of independent way of thinking about things. So I get a lot of happiness from that. But I'm very lucky in that I get a lot of happiness from what I do. And so I get up every morning and I am happy to come to work. I got great people I work with, and I like the challenge. I frequently say to my deputies, if things are too slow, it drives me nuts, right? I'm like, okay, something's got to happen. This is too quiet. And luckily, most of the time I get my wish, and some crisis develops that we've got to address. But I like being the problem solver. I like taking issues and figuring out how do we navigate through this. And that's essentially, what lawyers do, but it's kind of also what writers do, right? You think about, you want this end goal. How do you create a world that gets you to this end goal, whether that's the completion of a story, development of a character. So a lot of this is the same thing. And I remember in college, actually, talking with this fellow student, and I think we were both in the same English class, and it was a poem. And he was not interested in poetry at all. And he just didn't get it. And when I was trying to help him understand that a poem is a chance to analyze, right? It is an exercise in analysis, but it's not necessarily, like you say, a right or wrong answer. It's meant to provoke you into thinking about something deeper and bringing your own sort of overlay onto that, but to think about each word. Why did the author use that word? Or why did they put punctuation here? Why is the sentence broken up there? What images are they trying to convey? So, there's, I think, a lot of parallels between, my sort of affinity for analysis and language and building things. And so, this job for me allows me to exercise, I think, a lot of my loves. And so being here and, getting to handle crises and develop policy and advise on law and sort of be a part of the process of bringing Virginia into the modern world is very delightful.
It's funny you mentioned Parker and Trey, and we have a question from Frankie Jones, who is asking, considering your rich and diverse life experiences, what advice would you give to your son or daughter about making their way through this world? And I wanted to add on to that too, because you said something earlier about having them not just go along or like kind of believe the stories or the things that are set up for them. And particularly, I think about this with daughters, and especially thinking about the young women that we were and how strictly we were both raised. How do you encourage and amplify that sense of having your own voice and sticking to your opinion and believing that there is space for your opinion to be heard in the world, raising a son and a daughter, and especially raising a Black son and a Black daughter in a world that is maybe not necessarily as ready sometimes to make that space for them. How do you make sure that stays strong?
Yeah, one of the things I was very surprised about when I became a mother and started raising children was there is a difference in how I perceive raising my daughter as opposed to my son. And it struck me one day, I will tell you, my daughter is, she loves to sing, and she's fairly extroverted. And I remember being in a store, and she may have been 4 years old. And she was, under the racks, pulling the clothes around, and she was singing. I mean, I think she thought she was in the star of a Broadway show, and she was just happy. And I cringed because I was like, you're being too loud. Stand still, be quiet. And this older white lady came over to me and she said, honey, you are squelching her spirit. And I thought, what? And then it sort of dawned on me that there is this sort of dichotomy with young women, and maybe all young women, but specifically Black women. It's that I struggle with trying to make sure that she understands that she should be strong and she should be heard, and that she should have an opinion and she shouldn't let anyone sort of squelch her spirit. But also there is this sense that you need to be proper and you need to be quiet and appropriate, right? And not too challenging of certain authorities, because that's kind of how I was raised. And so it's hard to teach, I think, girls that it's okay to say, I disagree with that, and here is why, but also sort of teach them this respect for authority that at least was ingrained in me as a young person. And my husband will laugh at this, but one of the stories I love to tell is, my daughter was very much a fan of the whole Frozen sort of phenomenon. And she, like every other 4-year-old at the time, was singing it any and everywhere. And we had a family reunion to go to. in North Carolina, and my mother-in-law really wanted my daughter to perform in the talent show and sing Frozen. And I was a nervous wreck. And so I had a conversation with my husband, and I thought we'd agreed that my daughter, who's just 4, never been in front of a crowd of people before performing, would not do this. And so we get to this family reunion, and we're sitting at the table, and there are maybe 100, 150 people there. And I get to the talent portion of this program, and I look at the program, and my daughter's name is in the program. And so I look over at my husband. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? Parker's not performing. And he was like, oh, no, don't worry about it. So he gets up and he goes over to the DJ. Of course, he has the song programmed in. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this is not happening. And I feel myself hyperventilating because I'm so afraid that she gets up there and she doesn't do well. That is forever going to taint her about, being in public or public speaking, or making her afraid of or feeling, insecure. And so I'm sitting there, and they get to the part of the program where they call on Parker, and I'm about to get up and say, there's been a mistake. My daughter will not be performing. And my daughter jumps up from the table and runs to the stage. And I'm speechless. And she gets up there and she sings Frozen like she was Whitney Houston. And she just loved it. And then she came back to the table to a round of applause and sat down and said, that was fun. And I thought, I was sort of projecting my own insecurities onto her, right? And I didn't give her enough credit to understand what she thought she was capable of. And so that has been a struggle as a mother and as a Black woman, trying to find that sweet spot where I allow her the room to grow without forcing upon her my own sort of insecurities of what if you failed, or what if you start developing this persona that Black women are always quote unquote sassy and not thoughtful enough in what they say, and so that's been a struggle for me. But my daughter's, she's fearless, and I frequently just have to step back and let her be fearless.
There's a second question from Dr. Carol Boyce Davies, who asked, were you the advisor at the time when the governor got caught wearing blackface? How did you help him through that, given the way that racism is read in the United States?
So yes, I was counsel to the governor when that yearbook picture came out. And, it was a tough time for everybody in this office. It was a tough time for Virginia. And it was a time in which we all needed to step back and sort of focus on what we were doing and why. And I think the governor has really, made no secret about the fact that this experience has caused him to sort of reevaluate how he perceives race and issues of inequity in Virginia. And I think it's important to note that when the governor came in, issues of inequity were always at the top of his list. He did a lot of things to promote equity in Virginia before the yearbook scandal. But I think after the yearbook scandal, he sort of doubled down and decided to learn more. And he went through, a very significant period of time where he was just focused on learning about the issue and learning about how to make it better. And he had lots of meetings with advocates and constituents and experts about inequity, not just in Virginia, but across, in the entire South. And he did the time. He read the books. He had discussions, very hard discussions with people who were not happy with him. And he made a decision that if he was going to stay, he was going to be committed to change. And that's exactly what he has done ever since then. And so it was a learning experience for all of us. I mean, I was there, for this horrible time. And there were lots of times when I, thought about, why am I staying here with this? But first of all, I believe in the governor. I've always believed in the governor. I think the man that I first met in that interview is the man who's currently in the governorship. And I stayed because he was just as committed to the things that were important to me. And he is very good about eliciting people's opinions. I can tell you that one of the reasons I knew very early on that he was someone who was very interested in making real change was an opportunity I had very early on in the administration. And I'd probably been here less than 6 months. And one of the things the governor's office does is we issue proclamations, and they're usually very, pro forma things. Someone will say, it's George Washington's birthday next week. Would you please issue a proclamation, saying happy birthday, George Washington. It's honorary George Washington Day or something. And so we did that. We got one of those proclamation requests for James Madison because it was James Madison's birthday coming up in a couple of days. And normally I don't review those. Normally those are reviewed by the Deputy Chief of Staff. She, however, was out of the office that day. And the Chief of Staff was out of the office that day. So I was the next one in line to review it. And so someone brought me the proclamation and asked me to review it and, make a recommendation about whether we send it out. And so the proclamations are usually pretty much prepared by the person who's requesting it, right? Because these are things that happen pretty much year to year to year. So I got the packet, and as I was reading it, it was the same stuff. James Madison, father of the Constitution, born here, did this, he's great, wonderful stuff. But there was nothing about sort of the impact of him having enslaved people or their lives or the impact on Virginia or the legacy of slavery. There was nothing about that. And so I sat at my desk for a little while sort of thinking, can I recommend to the governor that he issue this proclamation? Am I comfortable with continuing to sort of promote this very one-sided view of Virginia's history? Is this the opportunity that I have to say, we shouldn't continue to do this? Is there, there should be a more wholesome retelling of this. And so now I remind you, I didn't have a relationship with the governor before I took this job. And so I had no real idea how he was going to receive any suggestion other than, sure, let's do it. But I sort of felt like this was my moment, right? This was my moment to say, no more of the same old, and not on my watch sort of a thing. So I took a deep breath, walked into the governor's office and said, Governor, we got this. This is what their ask is. Here's my recommendation and why. And so we sat down and had a very fulsome conversation. Again, this is 6 months into 2018, about Virginia's history, about James Madison, about how we wanted to tell it and whether or not we wanted to keep sort of promoting the same sort of recount of Virginia's history. And I was so refreshed to have him engage in a conversation about why that's not the right thing to do anymore. And so he agreed with me. We're not going to issue this proclamation, and we're going to have a more fulsome review of these and how we project Virginia's history going forward. This is not right, and we're not going to continue to do it. So I walked out of there in early 2018 after having this conversation with him, knowing that this was going to be an opportunity in this administration to do more than just sort of reevaluate the proclamations. But it was going to be an opportunity for us to look at recasting Virginia's history on the whole.
Can you talk a little bit about Project Traveler as women who walked across the campus on the daily at Washington and Lee University, where Robert E. Lee is buried and Traveler is buried, and so Project Traveler, so many of you may know that Virginia has, as many other states in the Union have in the last few years, has really started to evaluate their Confederate monuments and whether or not they are appropriate for public spaces.
especially public spaces that are outside. And so ever since the Unite the Right rally in 2017 in Charlottesville, there's been an ongoing discussion in Virginia about whether or not we keep these Confederate monuments up. Is there a way to contextualize them? Or are we, quote unquote, erasing history if we take them down? And so after the Unite the Right rally in 2017, discussions really sort of bubbled up about these Confederate monuments. And so there is, or there used to be, at least in Richmond, several of these monuments along a road called Monument Avenue. And it had numerous monuments to various Confederates. And pretty much the heart of that monument, of Monument Avenue, was this enormous statue of Robert E. Lee. And it had been there since 1898. And pretty much people just considered a foregone conclusion that it was going to stay there. But there began to be rumblings about taking Robert E. Lee down because he did not represent the Commonwealth that we were today. So there'd been previous conversations about that in the prior administration. And so when the governor came in, well, let me backtrack. One of the things he had said on the campaign trails, he thought that these Confederate monuments should come down, that the appropriate places for them were in museums, not in public outdoor spaces. So when we came into the administration, one of the things my team and I started to immediately work on was, can we take this statue down? There'd been some discussion that this statue could not be removed by Virginia because, and I won't get into all the legal reasons, but let's say there was a restriction, a restricted easement created when it was the statute and the land around the statute was given to the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth in the late 1800s had signed a deed saying that we are going to forever keep and hold this statue to the monumental purpose to which it was granted. And so folks felt like you can't take it down because you promised you're going to keep it forever. And so when we came in, we started working on legal theories about how to take this down. And, we knew that this was going to be very controversial. And so we developed a code name for our discussions and our documents that dealt with this. And it was Project Traveler. And my team at the time didn't know who Traveler was. And so when I came up with the name, they're like, well, who's Traveler? And I said, it's the horse. It's perfect, right? No, most people around the office aren't going to know what it is. So that's how we developed the code name Project Traveler. So we started working on this very early on into the administration and sort of just sat on it. And it was a very extensive proposal because, as you can imagine, with deeds that go back to the late 19th century, there were a lot of things we had to sort of get in line before we could make a recommendation. So with the events over the summer of 2020, because of George Floyd's murder and the summer of protests and the Black Lives Movement, there became an uproar, an outcry for the removal of these monuments. And specifically, this monument started to receive a lot of attention from protesters, and there became an outcry to take it down. And so there was an opportunity. I think the Secretary of Public Safety came to me one day and said, along with the Chief of Staff, Governor's interested in taking this down. Can we take it down? And I said, yes, we can take it down. And here's the proposal about how we do that. And so the governor was ecstatic. And so he moved on that proposal in about 2 days. He made that announcement in June of 2020 that we were going to take it down. We were subsequently sued about 5 or 6 days later with an injunction that prevented us from taking it down immediately. But we've gone through several lawsuits. We prevailed in the trial court. He agreed with the governor's theory that he could take it down. It is now on appeal to the Virginia Supreme Court. They're going to hear it in June. And we're very confident that the Supreme Court's going to agree with the trial court, and we're going to get Robert down.
Rita, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your experiences with us this evening. It's surreal.
It's really weird, isn't it?
doing this. It's surreal how old we are as well. But thank you so much. I want to take this opportunity also to thank the Zalaznicks and Cornell for producing. Thank you to everyone behind the scenes who have put this together. Chris, Aurora, Lynn, Aishan, to the English department. And thank you everyone for attending. The next Zalaznick Reading Series event will be the Eamon McEnany Memorial Reading by Sharif Shanahan on Thursday, March 18th at 7 p.m. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope to see you again very soon. Thanks, Rita.
Thank you, Ray.